estimated 48% of Ontario's population. The stigma, stereotypes the Black Ontarian and Black Canadian Muslims, Black Canadians face have impacted public policies, education, employment, social services, and more. Black children are more likely to be in foster care or enrolled in lower academic streams. Black men are more likely to interact with the justice system than their white counterparts at all levels of society. Black women are more likely than white women to be unemployed or underemployed, despite having higher levels of education. 8.8% of Black women with university degrees are unemployed, compared to 5.7 white women with high school diplomas. As a result, in nearly every measure of opportunity, security, and fairness in our society, anti-Black racism is shamelessly shining. Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. I am your host, Taha Ghayur, with another episode of Canada Today on Muslim Network TV. You can watch us live on Galaxy 19 cable, as well as on muslimnetwork.tv and on our social media platforms. Some of Canada's leaders recently claimed that systemic racism doesn't have roots in our country the way it does in the United States. However, many Canadian activists say the racism Black people face is no different. Today, I have with me three wonderful guests who will share their experiences and their insights as Black Muslims and African Muslims in Canada, African and Black Canadian Muslims. They have mustered the courage to use this tragic loss and recent tragic loss of George Floyd to educate non-Black Canadians and non-Black Canadian Muslims about Black Lives Matter and anti-Black racism. Our first guest I'm going to introduce to you is Bilqis Quick. She's an entrepreneur and a floral designer who owns Zuhur Designs. She is one of the founders of the Toronto Muslim Homeschoolers. She is also a proud mother of two talented performing nasheed artists who go by the name of Mustaqim. So welcome, Bilqis, to our show.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair, for having me.
You're welcome. Next is Samia Abdi, who is a consultant, public speaker, and a community animator who strategically fosters collaboration, connection, consensus to shift the public health system to be more equitable. Samia's philosophy is grounded in challenging multiple and intersecting forms of oppression, understanding marginalization in knowledge production, research, and practice, and building equitable relationships. She is passionate about creating safe and non-judgmental spaces that foster growth and allow for failure and transformational learning. Welcome to the Canada Today show, Samia. Thank you. And last but not least is Buna Muhammad, who is a Canadian spoken word artist and a writer. In 2007, Buna won the CBC Poetry Face-Off Best New Artist Award. He also has a playwright residency at Theatre Passé Montréal in Toronto. He has appeared on TEDx Toronto, and he has short story published in Penguin Canada anthology called Peace I Peace. Besides poetry and theater, Buna Muhammad is a founder of Safia Media, an Islamic media production company, and has continued the art of storytelling through various platforms of media. Thank you. Good to see you again, Buna.
Jazakallah khair for having me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, I know, first of all, I want to acknowledge it is a difficult time for all of you and for people of color, and more specifically, Black communities who are going through a process of healing, and yet you also are taking on the burden of educating our communities and our society about what it is like to be a Black person in our community. And on top of that, another layer of being a Muslim. So I want to thank you for your courage and for your time and for your patience being with us today. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
oh yeah, no problem. So we'll start off with Bilqis. Bilqis, you being a mother of 5 children, including 4 young, handsome Black men growing up in Canada, what was your first reaction to the brutal murder of George Floyd that we witnessed in Minnesota? And how are your kids processing this graphic display of systemic racism?
To me, it was just like another murder. Just before that was the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery. This has been going on for centuries, and it was, of course, it was a shock. I ended up watching the video by mistake, and just dealing with the usual emotions that come from seeing another murder at the hands of police. It's quite personal to me, not only because I have 4 Black sons, 3 of which are adults, but also being the child of two people who were activists, Black activists in the 60s. One that is actually from America, so had firsthand experience with anti-Black activism in the 60s and continues to today. And my mother being from Jamaica, who also has, the people of the islands have the history of being descendants of slaves as well. And her coming to Canada as a young child, and also being in the Black movement in Canada in the 60s as well. And, just being brought up by these 2 people with all of their stories and so forth. And then my own experience of being a Black Canadian as well. So I feel like it all happened just quickly but slowly after the murder of George Floyd. And like in a matter of days, my children who, we live kind of in the suburbs of Toronto. So the experience of being a Black male is not like every day in your face as it is like, being in the States or being in different parts of Toronto. But having my son, who has had number of experiences of racism, and he is the one who is the darkest complexion, has the darkest complexion, I think it was the day after or something like that, and I woke up and I saw him and I saw that he looked really not well. And I said, like, what happened? Like, and he said, I didn't sleep. And I was, saying like, what, like, are you distressed or something? And he says, actually, I'm afraid to go outside. And that just struck me. Like, I can't even like describe to you the emotions that I felt. Because I have cousins that live in New York and Georgia and Atlanta, and I've had relatives who've been assaulted by police, incarcerated, shot, but this was, I've been living in Canada, which of course has major systemic racial issues, but isn't the epicenter. And now for my child to say this to me, it just actually hit home. And it just enraged me so much that I ended up writing something on Instagram, my personal page, that kind of went viral. And I was, it was like, it was just in that moment that just feeling that the rage and the pain just hitting so close to home. And from that point on, it's just been, the protest started, and just and a roller coaster of having to deal with my own emotions and other people's emotions, and then now becoming a history teacher. It's been challenging. Let's put it that way.
Well, thank you for sharing such a deeply personal and emotional, connection that you have shared with us, and the story that you shared with us. Samia, as Bilqis just mentioned, this is nothing new, sadly. And historically, we know that anti-Black racism and oppression has taken on extremely ugly forms for the past 4 centuries, if not more. Going back as far back as, of course, transatlantic enslavement project by the colonial settlers in North America. But beyond, throughout history, we know that Black people, people of darker skin, or racialized people in general, have been treated very, very differently. Are Canadians immune to such deeply rooted systemic racism? Do you think the same thing can happen in Canada, and does it happen in Canada? Because there are all sorts of conversations happening about this, and you hear some high-profile people almost denying it. So I wanted to hear your perspective and your thoughts on this.
So thank you so much, Taha, and Bilqis, I echo every single word that you said. So of course it's happening in Canada, and will continue happening in Canada. And with that, we recognize that we are actually on Indigenous lands and we're on colonized land. And in this land that we call home today has been built on a system of colonization and racism. So taking a minute to acknowledge that we are into Toronto, I am at least into Toronto, the land of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and that this land continues to be home to many, many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And with that, we know the experiences that Black folks across coast to coast in this country, and then kind of honing in this experiences that anti-Blackness that is also experienced with Black Muslims particularly. So as we know, we are, part of the huge rally that happened last Saturday, not this past Saturday, but the one before, was calling justice for Regis. And we are thinking about other folks who were killed in the hands of the police, as close as DeAndre Campbell, which was killed on April 7th. So, and again, did not make the headlines as George Floyd's video had made the headlines. We're talking about others like Nicholas Gibbs, who was killed in Montreal. So we have so many examples of people who are killed by the police or hurt by the police when the communities have called for help. As a Somali Canadian, as a Black Muslim woman, I cannot help but also remember Abdurrahman Abdi in Ottawa being killed by police in broad daylight, very similar to what happened to George Floyd, and that also being caught in camera, witnessed by children, mothers, and family members in the area. And the reality of not only that if injustices like that happen in Canada, but the fact that our system reflects that of the US in terms of accountability, police accountability. I was reading actually a post by Imam Ibrahim Hindi the other day that he did a bit of research with his students around the number of police brutalities in Canada and comparing it to numbers of police officers who were charged and then the number of police officers who were convicted, and finding out that the conviction rate in Canada for police brutality and police murder is 0.03. Can you imagine? And one of his students asked him, Sheikh, if I'm expected to not get charged for taking another life, if the rate is 0.03, what are the chances that I will not do that action? So the lack of accountability is huge in terms of, so that this is layered topic, right? The first of all is like, do we have racism in Canada? Yes, we do. It was built in racism. Do we have anti-Black racism in Canada? Yes, we do, because we have a long history of slavery and we have a long history of mistrust between Black community and the systems that we call govern us right now. And then once we unpack that, and once the rest of the Canadian community and society recognizes that racism exists, the next level is, what does accountability look like for these acts of brutality? So I think I'm going to kind of conclude that. So the answer, to put it simply, is yes. Is Canada ready to face its own demons? I hope so. I hope that this is a wake-up call for everybody. I don't want to use George Floyd's death as an opportunity. It's not an opportunity. It's painful. It's pitiful that it took this level of a black man being handcuffed, being completely helpless, being subdued by the police, yet losing his life. And just to kind of finish it off, because I was having this conversation with an imam today, is that this maybe finally uncovers the fact that black men have been blamed for police brutality. We were told that if you said yes sir, and obeyed the rules and followed the rules and kept your eyes on the ground, you'll be safe. We were told if you didn't carry any weapons, you'll be safe. We were told if you dressed well, you'll be safe. We were told that if you didn't wear a hoodie, you'll be safe. Like, so many things have been told to black communities. And I think in broad daylight, what has happened with George Floyd shows dismissed all those myths and took away from victim blaming that has been happening to the Muslim community, the Muslim black community, but broadly to the black community.
Excellent. Yes, you're right. I mean, this incident has really exposed so many myths. It was a big myth buster in so many ways, and that leads me to Buna, you tweeted recently, I am black and Muslim. Everywhere I go, someone hates me. I believe you have captured sentiments of most black Muslims in North America, at least. So you being a media person, you being an artist who has traveled quite a bit to the US, to the United States, and of course across Canada, how has your experience been as a black, Somali man driving or walking around the street, taking a stroll, casually? How has your experience been over the past few years, in this society? And would you agree that Canada is racist, or Canada has a systemic racism problem, as Samia just sort of uncovered for us?
Yeah, well, I think, first, my family's from Ethiopia, actually. But like many, whether it's Somali or Ethiopian or any immigrant community that, especially black Muslims that have immigrated to Canada, many of us came with the expectation that this was the land that was sold to us as diverse, as friendly, as welcoming, as warm. And I think for people like myself, particularly, who were born here, have immigrant parents, but I was born here and I grew up here from a very young age, I automatically knew that I was different. I automatically knew that my skin was something that made me a threat, right? I went to a school that was predominantly all white kids, and being a child who, stood out from their classmates, I automatically had to fend for myself. I felt like my identity, my skin, my complexion made me a target, made me someone who was constantly on the defensive. And it did a lot. I mean, there's a lot of, and I definitely commend people like Sister Bilqis, who I know, homeschooled her kids. And when I actually asked them about it, they told me it was partly due to the same experiences that I had, that she was trying to prevent for her own children, is the feeling of shame and guilt, and not necessarily guilt, but the inferiority complex many young black children develop going through just the educational system, even in Ontario, that we're not mentioned in history books. When we are, it's always negative. We're basically picked on by our teachers. I, like many students, was streamlined, or I was supposedly streamlined to no lower expectations of education. It wasn't expected of me to go to university. They didn't expect me to do very well in academics. And this, is a lifelong dilemma that I've been dealing with to this day. Those feelings of insecurity, those don't go away overnight. That's something that you kind of live with the rest of your life. But to put that statement I made in context, I said, I'm black and Muslim. Everywhere I go, someone hates me. That was actually from a poem that I had written when I was 19 years old, when I was like 20 years old. I'm 33 now. So that was more than a decade ago. And I wrote that poem at a time, this was post 9/11. This was at a time when, especially as a Muslim, my identity and our identities was being exploited for, you know, war campaigns, and so just my identity alone, I'm not a sister. I can only imagine as a sister walking around with hijab, those feelings must be heightened. You know, for the most part, a lot of people don't even look at me and think I'm Muslim, right? That's their own prejudice or background. But knowing that, you know, my last name, walking to an airport and dealing with police and having those opportunities to deal with law enforcement has created definitely a level of distrust. I mentioned this on a program actually that me and Sister Bilqis did a few days ago, that for my entire life, I've been scared of the police, right? And a lot of people don't really understand why. My first experiences with police is when I was probably like maybe 10 or 11 years old. I was riding my bike and I was swarmed by like maybe 5 or 6 cruisers. And they automatically, you know, started asking me for identification. They searched me, they patted me down. And imagine they're asking an 11-year-old for identification. What identification does 11-year-old had? I had nothing. I had like a library card, right? And from that moment onwards, and again, this was not something my parents could prepare me for. My parents were not born on this land. They didn't necessarily know this was the way they would be treated. This was something I had to navigate on my own. And learning from a very early age that these people that are supposedly there to protect and serve, they're a genuine threat. Like, I should be worried about them. I knew from my own experiences with police growing up that I should, firstly, if I see them, I should avoid them. I shouldn't be in a situation where they have an opportunity to talk to me about something. I also knew very early, I'm talking like from the age of maybe 11 or 12 years old, that they could misconstrue something I say and use it against me. That I could easily be tricked or manipulated by something they say to make myself be in trouble. And many experiences like that, you know, through my entire life. And I grew up in Toronto. I grew up like in downtown Toronto. So my experiences, I think, you know, and now I live in the suburbs, so I don't interact with those people. I don't interact with police officers as much, just because I'm not, you know, I don't even do anything. I just drive my car. I go to the masjid. I don't have those many experiences that many young people have being out and about. But I think, like anyone who's grown up here, it's an obvious fact that, you know, this is a racist country. This is built upon the exploitation of people, of Black people, of Native people, of Asian people who were forced to build a railway. Like, we know that there is a history, systemically taking and stealing from people of color. And I think when I actually studied it, it kind of made sense. I was like, okay, well, of course, we're this type of proximity to the US. And of course, Canada is very funny because Canadian racism is very polite. It's very indirect. It's very subtle. And we always paint ourselves as the good guys, right? This was the end of the Underground Railroad. This is where slaves would come to find their freedom. But then when you actually study and you learn about Canadian history and you find out that, wait a second, like, you know, there was massive human rights abuses. Slave owners in Canada were very William Jarvis, who's a very famous baron, and there's a high school called Jarvis Collegiate downtown Toronto that my wife actually attended. He was a slave owner. In fact, he was such a ruthless slave owner when slavery was abolished, he refused to give up his slaves, right? And this is a man who we for the most part we idolize. We have streets and schools named after them. So when you really see the history of the place that we live in, it's no wonder that white supremacy is still, alive and flourishing. It's embedded in the system and the structures that we deal with every single day as Muslims, as Black people, and I think as human beings. It's something that's quite obvious and evident.
Well, thank you for that brief history lesson. I think we all need to hear more of this. Bilqis, you have been quite busy for the past couple of weeks, I know, educating the Muslim community, the anti-Black community, not anti-Black, sorry, I meant to say non-Black community, about racism. And how has your experience been so far? While you gave your talks and had conversations, what were some of the reactions you noticed over the past couple of weeks?
Because I own a business and a lot of it's on social media, there's that part for me where there's the social media aspect, and because of the business that I have, a lot of my being floral design, a lot of my customers and clients that happen to be in the GTA are Indo-Pak community and Arab community. So on my social media, it just basically, you know, over the past week has shown me incredible. It's very eye-opening. Our community has a lot of work to do, a lot of unpacking of their own, you know, racial and prejudice to do. You know, basically wars going on about what should be posted, not posted, you know, and just really a feeling for me watching it. The feeling that I feel is that there's a lot of insensitivity that's happening. And again, it comes down to the fact that this is about Black people. You know, really like to cut to the chase. This is about Black people. And I find myself saying in different spaces, you know, when something was happening, or when somebody is trying to protest against the atrocities that have been happening in Palestine and that are happening in Kashmir or anywhere else around the world, people, you know, seem to be able to muster up the sensitivity and, you know, feel some sort of empathy for them, you know, regardless of the way they behave when they're protesting, you know, and they feel a sense of solidarity with these people around the world. You know, there's lots of Christian Palestinians that are, you know, also suffering under Israeli rule, but Muslims have no issue supporting them, you know, and it's very eye-opening because again, it really is just showing the what has happened to our, you know, non-Black Muslim community under colonialism, and they're just bringing it here, and they're, you know, just continuing to perpetuate it, you know. For me, what I mainly say to people is you need to educate yourself, right, about the country that you live in. You've come here to get a better life, or you're running away from something. You're running away from a war. You're trying to protect yourself here. And when you come here, you try to get a better life. A lot of the times you do end up, you know, improving your life. And you're just basically, you know, reaping on the backs of the people who have built this country, you know, from our indigenous brothers and sisters, you know, and then, you know, there has been a recent acknowledgement of the indigenous brothers and sisters, but they just basically stop there, you know. And again, it really comes down to the color of the skin, right? And you know, so many times people think like, you know, they had watched movies, they watch Hollywood when we're, you know, back home, and they had this mentality of Black people. So they come here and they continue to think that way about Black people. The fear of Black men, the, you know, the fact that they, you know, Black people need to steal, you know, all these notions that they have collected over the years, and they continue to you know, think this way. And it really is, to me, it really is like, if you, especially in the younger generation, like, to be honest, I don't know about the older generation. And this is how I feel right now. But the younger generation, you know, I still consider myself young, so I guess my generation and downwards, like, really, it's just about education. Like, just open up a book about slavery, you know, Google slavery, just look at one picture of the ships that brought human beings across the ocean, and the way that they were treated, were housed, you know, and just look at the images, and then take it in, and then you can start to understand, you know, that what has happened from that point on to, you know, all the way to now, is just the horrific history of black people in this part of the world, you know. And you know, once you do that, then what can you say then now, right? It just shows, it will just show, you know, how, your heart really, you know. So.
Well, this is a good segue to what I was going to ask Samia about. I know you have been, advocating for safe spaces and open conversations. Now, looking at Black oppression and the lack of opportunities that we see for Black fellows, friends here in Canada, I'm wondering, is it fair for us to compare other forms of racism with anti-Black racism? Because as Bilqis just talked about, people in Kashmir or people in Palestine, and these are of course the causes that a lot of Muslims are very much attached to. But of course, even indigenous racism that you just talked about earlier, actually all of you have touched upon, in one way or the other. Is it fair for us to talk about, when we talk about anti-Black racism, at the same time do comparisons, or does that trivialize anti-Black racism?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Actually, I just want to share quickly. So props to Bona and Bilqis who've been engaging the wider Muslim community. I have not been, and Taha, I think I have mentioned this to you. This is actually the first conversation that I'm having with the general community. My approach has been over the past week and a half to cocoon in to only engage with Black Muslim community, and last night we held a healing space for Black Muslims that was really amazing. So I had to fill my cup so today I can come on and have this conversation with all of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being there.
Thank you. So so it's funny actually. I think my sister and I were having this conversation around literally it translates bringing in Palestine and Kashmir and Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. Like it is exactly translates into saying all lives matter. When we say Black lives matter and white people say all lives matter, that's exactly what non-Black Muslims are doing when they bring in all these other oppressions. There's no difference between that. And my sister shared a funny analogy with me, saying that it's like as if your father passed away and you're holding a funeral for him, and then your friend comes and they bring a picture of their father that has passed away last week or last year or last month, and says like, look, but my father has passed away as well. So it really takes away from the current moment. Who is grieving, who is in pain, who are we talking about today? And particularly for Muslim community. So there's two sides to this story. There's an international, global kind of conversation that is being had right now for the first time in the Muslim world around their own anti-Blackness that happens, anti-Black racism that happens in these countries. And that's a separate conversation. And then there's the conversation that we're having right now in Turtle Island, in North America, whether it's the US or Canada, around our own anti-Black racism, whether it's in a societal perspective or in our own masjids, organizations, households. So the conversation that we're having here is important because, we have so much evidence. We've been having this talk for so long, and people are waking up to it right now, yet they want to continue dismissing it and bringing in. I was actually talking to an imam today that as you might know, Taha, there has been a call out for masjids across the nations to talk about anti-Black racism during Jum'ah. And alhamdulillah, a lot of masjids have come and done that. But also not everybody has done their homework to be able to speak in this, hold this conversation and hold this space. And what we've seen a lot of the imams are doing is, again, bringing in this conversation about like Islam is against oppression, against racism. There's no Arab that has power over non-Arab and all that. Wonderful, mashallah. We can talk about generalities. You know what? We could have had this conversation in December. Maybe we'll have this conversation in the winter. This moment is particularly around anti-Black racism, and talking about it in any other form is dismissive, and it's belittling what currently is happening. And there's a different kind of racism. There is Islamophobia, there is stereotypes, there is discrimination, there is a hate, there is fear mongering that happens in other circumstances, but that's not what we're talking about right now.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much, because my next question was actually about what's the big deal about all lives matter, and I appreciate that you addressed that, because that's a very, very powerful analogy, and really I hope it sticks with everybody who thinks that, we should be talking about all lives matter, while we know that, right now what matters is really the Black lives. That's what we should be talking about. So Samia, you recently tweeted, "Our pain and anguish is real, and whatever path that is taken to express rage is legitimate." Can you please explain what you're talking about here? What are you referring to here?
So I'm referring to, again, the dismissal of the root causes, the continuous focus on the outliers, the continuous focus on things that how some Black young people are expressing their anger, their frustration. So the conversations around burning or destruction or looting, and I've heard a lot of Black activists talk about, like, no, you've looted Black people from Africa, you've looted Black wealth, you've been doing the looting, so you don't have the right to come back and say Black people are looting these spaces, right? And there's a clip by Trevor Noah that has done exceptional work explaining that there's a social contract between individuals and societies, and when the society continuously breaks that social contract with an individual, then the individual owes the society nothing. When Black lives have been taken, Black people owe nothing to the society. When Black people have been denied education and economic prosperity, and just so we've been talking about the basics for so long. So it's like a pyramid, like the oppression that the Black people have been experiencing is like a pyramid, and death is at the top of that pyramid. And what people are responding to is death. Not only death, like in passive term, it's killing, it's a broad day murder by a helpless person, right? So it had to reach there. But what people are forgetting is all of what had got us here. How was that white man able to stay on the neck of George Floyd for 9 minutes, being recorded, having his, cam on, right? Having people around him tell him to stop, knowing that he had witnessed? What power, right? What system had allowed that to happen? For a Black life to be that worthless, that cheap. And, young Black people have been talking about, like, proving our humanity, continuously to say that we're not 1/3 of a man, that we're full humans, that we have the same rights. So I think that is what I meant by that the rage is real and the pain is real, and all paths taken are legitimate, even if they're seen as illegitimate from a societal or legal or moral perspective. Right? Keep your morality at home. Do act from where you are. And the other thing that I continuously say, the pathway to Black liberation has many ways. So take the path that most suits you in terms of what you're able to do, but do not by any means dismiss what others are doing and how others are expressing this moment of rage and pain. So that's what I meant by that post.
Well, thank you very much. Recently, or this week, we saw our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, taking a knee. We saw a few politicians and police chiefs taking a knee in solidarity with Black community. And while it is commendable, considering that, our Prime Minister is probably the first head of state probably to show this level of solidarity, I wonder, Bona, how important is this symbolic gesture, or is it just simply symbolic? That begs another question, and that is really, what is true allyship with the Black community? So, Bona, maybe you want to shed some light on this, and if anybody else has something else to add, please do so.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what the sisters think as well, because this is a very, very deep topic. I mean, I don't know exactly. I couldn't tell you exactly what perfect allyship looks like, but I think the beginning of it is acknowledging that pain, as Sister Samia mentioned, that realizing that what we feel is legitimate, it's real, not to dismiss it, not to minimalize it, not to compare it. And I love that analogy she used of comparing, the death of my father with the death of your father who died many years ago. This is something that in the moment, you know, and I've experienced it on my social media platforms, how many posts people are mentioning, okay, well, what about Palestine? And what about these places? And what about those places? And we are with those causes like 364 days of the year, right? As a Muslim community, our energy is continually put towards Kashmir and Palestine and Burma and these big hot topic conversations that we're used to having. But when it comes to issues revolving around Black Muslims, it seems like we don't have enough energy. We're already at the point of frustration where, you know, and I think it speaks to the reality of the Muslim community that Black lives to us, I don't think are as important. There are many Black Muslims who have been saying for many years that we don't feel comfortable in many of the spaces that are quote unquote Islamic, you know, whether it be Islamic schools, whether it be masajid, that we're not made to feel as though our voices are important. We're not made to feel as though, never mind being outside of the masjid or the non-Muslim world where I already feel like I'm under threat. I do feel like society doesn't see me as valuable. When you go inside Islamic spaces, having those same feelings is quite disparaging. And in regards to the statement or the actions of Justin Trudeau, I mean, there was the clip and there was the press conference that he had a few days ago where he was asked about, you know, speaking out against Trump's comments, and it was those, I think it was like 20 seconds of silence that was so awkward. It was like hard to stomach that amount of time. And it's almost like you could see the wheels turning in his head, like, well, I want to say this, but should I say that? And, you know, all these things that might have been happening. But imagine somebody said, you know, or somebody asked you, you know, how much is your life worth? Or should I help you at a time of need? And you had to really think about it. You had to spend that time and calculate, you know, well, is speaking out against the death and killing of this person really worth, you know, political or my job or whatever ramifications might come about? The fact that our lives are continually being negotiated amongst other people, that our humanity is something that other people have to decide and impose upon us, that, you know, whether Trudeau decided to kneel in solidarity, and that was something that was, I don't know why the kneeling was so significant. I didn't really get why that was such a thing, because when Colin Kaepernick, I don't know if you recall, the football player did that in frustration and protested the national anthem in the United States. That was seen as an act of defiance, and he was penalized, and he's been kicked out of the football league because of that. So I don't know. It's like sometimes kneeling is okay, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's an act of resistance, sometimes it's an act of solidarity. It seems like whenever white people do it or when they do it in their spaces, it's a great thing. It's something that is commendable. But when we do it on our terms, it's something which is, again, looked down upon. And similarly to the issues of protest, you know, that, and by the way, just to clarify, a lot of these protests are not exclusively open to Black people. It's not like it's just Black people running around the cities looting and causing havoc. There are many different people out there who are making or using this opportunity to also vent their own frustration. So I don't think we can just equate the looting and the problems outside with just the Black agenda or Black Lives Matter. I don't think that's even fair to do. But secondly, when we look at how Muslim countries and the Muslims within these countries have protested over years, you look at, and this is not to take away from anything, but the frustration that's built up in Palestine, where you have many people who are, you know, either they are, you know, walking up to police officers and actually killing them. Or you have, you know, what started the quote unquote Arab Spring, which was a man who was so frustrated, he actually set himself on fire, right? People at that time didn't necessarily want to focus the attention on what he did, but they looked at the greater spectrum of why he was doing it. And they used that as motivation to literally cause a revolution in that entire region, right? But when a few people are frustrated and, you know, they vent that frustration in the way that many young people do, and what is, you know, what they have access to, which might be, you know, quote unquote unsavory, but the fact that that is then a cause of concern, and people say, well, you know, we can't take their cause serious because A, B, and C. It's like, no, you didn't want to take it serious from the beginning, right? This was not an agenda that you were necessarily approving of. You don't want to see that power shift. You don't want to see you lose your power, because I think that is essentially what it comes down to, that in many of these, and I'm talking in the non-Muslim world, that many of these spaces, they are scared of losing their power. Right? They have had this control over Black communities for so long that if that is being threatened, of course, there's going to be a level of hostility and anguish amongst them. So I, generally speaking, I I don't know exactly why Trudeau. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Trudeau. I think he's better than, that's the best we can say about him, right? He's better than their guy, right? Better than Trump. But again, he is part of a system and a structure that is inherently racist. So I don't expect him to be a savior and fix everything. But at the same time, I think in terms of allyship, in order for us to move forward, yes, people have to acknowledge our frustration. They have to be willing to listen without speaking, right? I think that's, the famous quote, why Allah gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, where people are listening, but they're arguing with you at the same time. I don't think that's definitely counterproductive. And thirdly, I think especially in Muslim spaces, we need to stop equating the pain and suffering of Muslim countries with what's happening here in North America or in the Western world. We need to stop making those comparisons because they are different. They are very different. And at the same time, it's counterproductive to helping the situation at the moment, which is, something which I think all of us need to see happen.
Well, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I have a couple of more quick questions to ask, and we'll come back to allyship just at the end as we conclude now. Recently, me and my family and I did our own sort of reflection of our own internal biases and levels of, deeply rooted racism, even at times, and stereotypes that we have, in particular, when it comes to African Canadian and African American, or Black American or Black Canadian friends and our community. I think it's time every person and every family, every institution in Canada take a stock of their own racist attitudes and behaviors and preferences and prejudices and oppressions and patterns of abuse that unfortunately we're all, the Black communities experience because of us. What I wanted to ask each one of you, and maybe take 1 minute max, to share with us some red flags, some signs that you think that we should be looking at, non-Black folks should look out for in our own selves, in our own communities, so that we can stop and avoid really contributing to this anti-Black racism pandemic. So Samia, maybe you can start us off.
So the first thing is just maybe a small tip is to replace the word Black with Arab or with brown, right? So when you say Black people are, and if you're an Arab or a brown person, are you willing to say the same thing publicly? And do you have the same belief systems about Black people? So that is the whole unpacking. And as Sister Baqi said, the issue, the racism that we see, or the biases that we see in the Muslim community is deeply rooted. It comes in the form of cultural things like movies and so we're talking about. It's such a funny thing, but apparently some actresses and social influencers in the Arab world are donning blackface to be in solidarity with the Black people and calling it Black is beautiful. So. Wow. It is subhanallah, right? So it's like you're like, where do I even start? This is just so so deep. So and then we know that brown families sometimes would have conversations with their elders that are really disparaging to Black people, right? There are certain racial slurs that are used. So don't be dismissive about these things. Don't belittle anything. And I always believe in acting from where you are and with whatever power you have. So Brother Taha, you have this space, you have this channel, you have a large social media space that you hold, and leadership in the community. What are you doing with that power that you have, right? And then if it's someone only have contact with within their family, what are they doing about that? The other thing is, like, I would say, don't dismiss the discomfort. The moment that you feel like, ouch, did I actually do that? That is the moment that you keep on pushing and actually use that little discomfort, little pain, little prick on your finger, and recognize that prick on your finger and the discomfort that you're feeling right now compares nothing to people who have to go through this every single day. And that's what I tell when I train folks around anti-Black racism or racism in general. I tell them, you're coming in, this is voluntary, you can walk out, your life is not at risk, your livelihood is not at risk. So little discomfort is welcomed and needed. So don't run away from the pain. Don't go back to your comfort zone. Don't go back to a place that makes you feel good about yourself. It's okay to feel bad about yourself. But you know what? Your guilt, your shame will not do us any good. We want you to turn that feeling that you might have into action, inshallah.
Excellent. Bilqis, please share your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, so going on like what I was saying before, and Samia reiterated, is about the, just looking into your notions and your biases, your prejudice, and things like that you have gotten from, maybe for the parents, brought from their countries, right? What they've imparted onto their children. So what you have absorbed from your parents, right? And these biases that come from television, movies, things like that. The notions you have of Black people in North America, right? Which is sometimes separate from the notions you have of other Black people around the world. Black people from North America have their own set of categories that people come here with, that they have gotten from what has been put out there in Hollywood. And then say to yourself, like, really look at, some of the things that you believe. For instance, one of the notions, Black people steal. They like to steal. So really look at that and say to yourself, do you think that Black people inherently are born thieves? Like, are they born wanting to steal? And I would hope 9 out of 10 people would say, no, I don't believe that Black people are born wanting to steal. Okay, so once you have that, once you get that in your mind, then you say to yourself, why is it that there are so many Black people in prison? What's the cause? And then from there, then you can start wanting to look into it. Let's look into what's actually happening in the prison systems. Let's look into policing. Let's look into whatever. And then the answer will come to you. Okay, you will then learn the answer. But you're first starting with the person themselves, like the people themselves, and realizing that they're not inherently bad. And so therefore you don't have to fear them. There's no fear. There's no, issues that you have there, because it's another human being just like you that happens to be of a different race and have a darker complexion than you, And so, and I like to say, like, families need to actually, relate to people, Black people, like have Black friends, like get out there, get outside of your Indo-Pakistani, circle, your Arab circle, your whatever circle, and actually engage with Black people. And then you will realize, hey, they're human beings just like you, and it's yeah.
Well, that's great. That's a great example. When we were doing our meeting at home, we were asking ourselves how many how many people that we gave Eid gifts to just 2 weeks ago were actually people of other ethnicities and colors, and how many of them were specifically from the Black Muslim community, for instance. And so, alhamdulillah, that was a good introspection that we did. And even though, alhamdulillah, my kids have very good, diverse circle of friends, we realized we need to still do a lot better. We still have a long way to go, and I'm sure we all have to do that. So, Bona, why don't you share your thoughts on this quickly?
Yeah, I think last point that I would mention is that many times I find it frustrating at moments like this when Islamic organizations issue press releases and statements about anti-Black racism or police brutality, but how many of these same organizations actually have Black people within them? Right. I think there is a massive problem in terms of leadership in our communities where people do not see Black Muslims as competent. They don't see us as worthy of positions of leadership. They don't see us as being able to help guide the community in positive ways. So as many times as we are willing to stand in solidarity or share tweets or press releases and whatnot, we have to ask ourselves, even as organizations internally, where are all the Black people? Where are the Black Muslims? Where are the Black voices? Where are we getting our insight and information from, right? I think from an organizational perspective, I think that's an important thing to do, a kind of look back and think and reflect, because I know of way too many either masajid or Islamic organizations that in this moment now that we're in are very free, and they feel like they're doing the right thing by speaking out against anti-Black racism, but at the same time they themselves are composed of nothing but their own ethnicity, and it would be like the biggest sin in the world if they elected a Black person to their board, or if a Black person ended up becoming the president of their masjid. Like, many people couldn't see that. And we had the situation a few weeks back with Eid, and when it was announced in East Africa that Eid was going to be on Saturday, right? Like, for me, it was a no-brainer. I was like, all right, I'm rolling with those people, right? Because there are scholars, there are ulama who said, yes, this is the day of Eid. So for me, it was a no-brainer, but I could see in the hesitation of our community here that it was a very clear reminder that people do not respect our Islam. They don't respect us as Muslims. They don't respect our knowledge. They don't see us as legitimate in terms of sources of leadership. So I think that is something that I want really people to think about in terms of leadership, in terms of moving forward. Where do we get our guidance from? How do we see Muslims in leadership, and how do we see Black Muslims, particularly in organizational perspectives and organizations? How do we see Black Muslims as helping to guide the discussion, especially on anti-Black racism?
Great, thank you very much. I want to ask one last question, and I want you to be just very, very brief, please, because of time. We have 30 seconds each. I want to know what are top 3 things that non-Black Canadians and non-Black Canadian Muslims can do to strengthen the Black Lives Matter movement, to really truly be allies in this work of anti-Black racism, this new movement, not new movement, but new spark in the movement that sadly we are seeing once again, so that it doesn't, unfortunately, so that it doesn't just become another hashtag that is trending for 2 days or 3 days or 1 week or 2 weeks, and we move on. So what are top 3 things that we can do, us non-Black Canadians and non-Black Muslims, to really support this initiative and this movement? So I'll start with Samia, then Bilqis, and Bona, 30 seconds each.
1, follow and amplify Black scholars, so Black scholarship. So this is both religious and non-religious scholars. 2, invest in Black lives in terms of economic investment, invest in Black businesses, buy from Black businesses, hire Black folks. Finally, lobby with Black organization and Black activists for systemic change, whether it's in policing or in general anti-Black racism that has appears in everywhere in our society.
Excellent. Bilqis.
Yes, piggybacking on Samia, fighting for the dismantlement of the systemic racist systems that are out there in policing, health, education, and like the gamut as well. And starting off with educating yourself about the history of the country that you live in and Black anti-racism, and just education is the main thing.
Okay. Thank you, Buna.
Sammy did it so well. She, in 30 seconds, I don't know how to sum it all up, but I would say definitely learn. And I would have to just reiterate what the sister said, learn, invest, and be there and support, and not dismiss. I think those are very top 3 tips I would give.
Excellent. Well, on this note, we would like to end, and I want to end actually with a couple of quotes which are very relevant. One is, "Our lives begin to end the day we remain silent on things that actually matter." And the second one is Angela Davis, that you may have heard a couple of times recently, and that is, "In a racist society, it is not enough to be a non-racist. We must be anti-racist. This is the time for us to become active advocates of anti-racism. I want to actually thank our very courageous friends, allies, and great activists in our community, Samia Abdi, Bilqis Quick, Buna Muhammad, for sharing their pain with us, sharing their perspectives with us. I hope we can do much more. And unfortunately, this time there would not do justice to this very, very heavy topic. But at this point, we have to unfortunately end. I want to thank every one of you for tuning in. Thank you to all our viewers, all our supporters. Thank you to Dawanet for marketing, sponsorship, and partnership. Thank you for joining Muslim Network TV. Once again, this is your host, Taha Ghayur on Canada Today. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be with you.